Welcome to this Architecture Today webinar with SIG, Designing Education Buildings to Support Long-Term Estate Strategies, as we explore how we maximise the impact of investment in our educational building stock and what makes an effective long-term strategy and asset management plan. We're delighted to have three expert panellists who will be taking part in a panel discussion later, chaired by Ruth Slavid. The format for today's webinar has each of our panellists setting the scene in a brief presentation from their own perspective. There's also the opportunity for Q&A, so if you'd like to put your question forward, please click on Q&A. Our speakers will share how they're working with education estates to create learning environments that are sustainable, inspirational, flexible and safe, and responding to the challenges of delivering better, high-quality, low-carbon and safe education facilities that can adapt to future needs. Later, we'll hear from Ian Dryden, National Specification Manager, SIG Design Technology, who gives a specification view to improving durability, long-term cost savings and operational efficiencies. After that, Michelle Cohen, Director, Walters & Cohen's Architects, will share their approach to the recently completed general teaching building at St Paul's School, which includes a new library, dining hall, kitchen, administrative offices, a chapel, hall and 56 classrooms. But first, let's hear from Stephen Smith, partner at Wright & Wright Architects, who's going to share his learning from a snapshot of projects the practice has recently completed and also look forward to how education is changing.
Thank you for the invitation to share some ideas today in an area we're incredibly passionate about as a practice. Working on education projects is a wonderful ground for innovation and for collaboration. I'll share some ideas on how long-term thinking can support sustainable growth. I'll mostly focus on works to existing buildings that have been adapted and extended. I'll share examples of how education clients, whose second nature really is to explore, inspire, and think outside the box, can be a wonderful source of creative exchange. And in these unusual times of pandemic with so much uncertainty, this offers an opportunity to both look back and share some projects with you, and to look forward and offer some projections about where we might focus our design energy in the future. The quote that underpins the ethos of this talk, "The greenest building is the one that already exists." With the climate emergency we now face, the starting point for education estate development, and perhaps any development, should be to look at imaginative ways of developing existing buildings and sites, then to start to think about how they could be extended, and only then, after that, to think about how new pieces could be added to the jigsaw. So the first part of the talk, I'm going to share 5 projects at different scales and different types to give you a snapshot view of some thinking and ideas we've been engaged with as a practice. And the second part will just sum up and offer some thoughts on a piece of research we've carried out internally during this COVID period about how education is changing for those within the office, some of whom have gone back to university and some of whom were in education when the pandemic started. So to bring different viewpoints to the discussion today. When we look back at our past projects, it's easy and even quite nice actually to consider them in their pure plan form or as isolated objects. But as we all know, the richness comes in the interaction between these spaces in between, and the engagement with green ideas and infrastructure as a new layer of sustainable thinking over and above the basic plan of the building is really where we can find interesting areas for development. Themes common to all the case studies is how sustainability can help reduce running costs. Blended learning is with us to stay, happy to say. Some of our clients have said that in the past 6 months, we've maybe advanced 6 years in where we were heading. And the fact that probably a lot of you today are watching and sharing within your living rooms or bedrooms is the future really. And how can that help and support the quality of teaching space. And the last two themes there we think are inextricably linked: well-being and greening of the campus. And we'll show examples of different projects at different scales of where that's been effectively done and has been a driver for the design. First project I want to share with you today is the Royal College of Art, where we worked on a framework for many years. It's the first major competition win for the office, and to give you a sense of timescale, that was back in and around 1995. The model that Claire and Sandy made, that object you can see between the existing buildings, still stands as a reference point for the office. The ability to find space in the most tricky of corners and to transform that into new relationships is a very sustainable way of developing. Working within that framework, the client had a long-term plan in relation to two campuses: the existing one next to Hyde Park, which was quickly outgrown, and the new development site south of the river in Battersea, a short cycle or bus ride away, and how the ethos of creativity and entrepreneurship could be shared between those two campuses was a thread that ran through all the projects we did with them. Situated next to the Royal Albert Hall, the Art Bar Terrace project was never going to pass muster as a noisy building site, so the steelwork for that project had to be brought in quickly through a very tight gap and assembled to allow a kit of parts to be assembled very quickly and very economically. This is a COVID project before its time, and the quality of detailing is such that it's still enjoyed now very much 25 years later as a social space and a place of celebration at the end of year show. And on an everyday basis, that kind of breakout space that we all yearn for the students to come out of the studio, to socialise, to get a breath of fresh air and feel energised and recharged to go back and do more work, and not a bad setting to be studying in either. So south of the river in Battersea, a huge site became available. Many architects have worked on that site. We were tasked with transforming an old bus depot into a sculpture school, providing workshop spaces, as you can see in these slides, that were highly enjoyed by the creative students there, and this big warehouse space, but could be transformed into exhibition space for the end of year show. And quite the transformation from those messy spaces to these clean spaces, not always clean actually for the exhibition, depending on what they were showing. But that was a way of bringing that ethos from the main campus down to this project. So moving north again, up to the AA, we were involved in the master plan, which we delivered for the Architectural Association, based in the Grade 1 listed setting of Bedford Square. I'm sure you all know the school very well in different ways, but perhaps not the very interesting mix of buildings that they've got. To the right-hand side, you can see the Grade 1 listed buildings facing the terrace. What's really interesting is how the school has evolved and connected through to the Muse building at the back. And like the RCA building, the area of greatest interest is the in-between space, the courtyard spaces that lie in the in-between. Working with such an informed architectural client and student group, actually, we took a forensic approach to our analysis of the terrace. I can remember when Claire and the team laid out these drawings showing how the school had grown and adapted to fit in to this wonderful Georgian setting. And all the red lines you see there is where change had happened. And even the esteemed architects in the AA didn't appreciate that some of these elements that they thought were original had actually been very recent changes. And that created obvious places where we could change and open up and create lateral connections through this very long terrace, and also to start to solve very serious problems of access and fire safety. As part of a long-term way of thinking, the first spaces to be developed were the spaces that the students needed most. That was prototyping and model making workshops. And where would they go within this Grade 1 listed setting? Well, the most fertile ground for change was the basement. Spaces had been developed in an ad hoc and in some places quite a dangerous way. So sweeping change and opening up was possible. And all those spaces you can see there have a very strong relationship to those in-between courtyard spaces. And it was nice to show a group of architects that engineering is actually the answer to space making, carving out the floor to reach services at low level to preserve the quality of spaces in already low volumes. A really fascinating process to see where we could eke out space in this very complex set of basement spaces that at the end felt very clear and very open and a very safe environment for the students to work in. So moving out of London, I want to share some of our projects in Oxford. The first one's Magdalen College, a project very close to my heart. We worked on this for a long time to develop the site with a fantastic client group, Bursar Charles Young and then Rory Moore, and fellow librarian Christine Ferdinand, who had a wonderful vision and real passion to deliver spaces for her students that would be transformational, and Robert Langley, the estate manager, who oversaw and helped manage the whole project. We first won a competition to transform the building that most people think there looks like a chapel, right on the high street, into a student centre. And the plan was to move the library out of there into a new build. That didn't go down too well with Historic England, so we were tasked with looking at the development of this building. We looked again at how much space the existing volume would yield, and some interesting opportunities emerged. One, what would happen if we thought differently about the existing stone volume, and what if we extended it out into the garden so that we could engage with those ideas of well-being and greening that the fellow librarian was very interested in. To achieve that, some radical moves were needed, and certainly some thinking outside the box. With no space or desire for any air conditioning in this building, we had to address the roof. Acoustic and thermal insulation were added, and in the drawing at the bottom, tucked in behind the eaves, you can see vents that were added to create passive ventilation, and they were tucked in behind the stone parapets so that it would never be seen from the street, but that we could ventilate this building completely passively. It obviously helped to have the heavyweight mass of the stone walls, and in calculations we found that only a few days of the year would it feel slightly too hot in there, but that was obviously the summer period when most of the students would be away. So we managed to work with a very enlightened client group to understand the dynamics of the environment of the building and to come up with a very low energy solution working passively. And I think one of my favorite photos from the project's top right, I think someone in the office referred to it as gingerbread, going onto the roof. Those are Cotswold stone tiles that are added to the roof, and beneath that was the thermal and acoustic insulation. To give you an idea of how bad the pollution was from that busy road and all the dirt and water ingress had accumulated, here's a photo of some of the stone cleaning that we did. This is when the honey-coloured stone, which is something typical of Oxford, was revealed, and the team started to gain belief that this dirty old interior could become a stunning interior space for the students. And particularly that client group that I mentioned could really see the benefits of a synergy between new and old coming together to create a very dynamic set of spaces for the students. Another breakthrough in the project was the structural engineers calculating that all of the existing floors could be removed and that we could lower the floor slab to the existing basement without needing to underpin. A really fantastic piece of engineering by Alan Baxter's. And from that point, we started to clean the stone, remove the wallpaper and tiles that had been plastered over it, and came back in the end to this image on the right of a new lightweight steel structure being inserted within the stone shell and actually managing to achieve an extra floor of space within that building. So how did that building feel? Well, feedback from the students has been that it feels very homely and it feels very secure. When we were building this building, tuition fees came in, and we could certainly see the stresses that students were under to deliver for parents who were starting to spend a lot more money on tuition fees. So rather than the social space of the college being the bar or sports, the library became this, for the college, at least in this case, and feedback from other projects, as a real social and homely space that they could spend their time. And quite often that's 24/7, particularly in finals term. And so to the gardens, not every project can have such a wonderful setting. And we were really, really lucky to work with fantastic gardener Claire Shepherd in the college, who by stealth had been going through all the pristine quads with their rectangles of grass. You can see on the left-hand side where she started to nibble away at the edge of the lawn and introduce areas of planting to give rhythm and texture and colour, and feed into this overall ethos that learning could engage more with the outside and provide much more of a sense of welcome, of warmth and well-being for the student and the staff community. Next project I'll talk about is to show the benefits of phased development. This is St John's College in Oxford as well, not too far away from Magdalen, as I said. The estate had been developed on the left-hand side of that plan through the 20th century. And what had happened over time is this had left the historic core underused and in need of stimulus. And that historic core includes Canterbury Quad, which is one of the finest examples of Baroque architecture in the UK, very sadly underused at the time. And again, a very strong client group could see the benefits of bringing that history back into the active life of the college. And we developed incrementally and through a lot of testing of ideas, the three-phase approach. And the image on the right shows you those three phases. Phase one was relatively small and was about unlocking access and fire. That unlocking allowed phase two to happen, which was study centre, and stage three was the redevelopment of the old part of the college. So how was access and fire resolved? The problem of access was unlocked by threading a new passage, you can see on the image on the left, through a disused stall within the historic fabric. I remember going to site very early on in feasibility and trying to get in through the old door to the existing library, which was about 650 mil wide. I used to be a bit thin of it then, but it was still a challenge to get through that door. And what we managed to do through Claire's vision for the project was to create this new passage, which has a ramp running all the way through it to the space you see on the right. Once you see the image on the right, the new stair coming down provided a much needed safe fire escape from the historic core of the college. And similar to Magdalen, the combination of new and old elements comes together really nicely in that space. So on to phase two. A really pioneering design for the study centre emerged, which is a new build. And for the college to develop in such a complex corner of the site with these old garden walls you see on the left, they really wanted to make most of their investment. And for them, they were really challenging to the design team. I think Max Forden was certainly put on the spot, but this client group was able to think outside the box. They were able to grapple with radical concepts and complex ideas, which led to a project that is target zero carbon. That still needs to be proven through use, but we've set it up as well as we can. They bought into the retrofit ethos that it's a lot more sustainable to use your existing fabric. Very clever ideas emerged on on-site renewables, not just using PVs, but also going out into the adjacent landscape and the lawns to introduce boreholes, and to think very carefully and long-term about the use of sustainably sourced materials. So how do those unifying themes come through in this project? Well, unlike Magdalen, where we were working within the existing shell, with this new building, we were able to project out and allow everyone to enjoy the mature gardens from a new vantage point. The building supports study in a range of settings, from formal to informal, and provides a connecting space, as shown in the image on the right, from the 20th century part of the college back to that historic core, revitalising this part of the college for everyone in the community to enjoy. So to end with, that project at St. John's and Magdalen together really helped us as a practice to raise the bar in our thinking on sustainability. But there's a new frontier that Oxford University Estate is helping to support and pioneer, and that's Passive House. I mean, I think we all know and appreciate the Passive House, it's in the name, comes from housing background, and we're all becoming a lot more informed. And the benefits of Passive House is something we can't hide from anymore, we don't think. This current project we're working on, also with Max Fordham's, we're targeting a 53% reduction in CO2 emissions per annum, and likewise heating demand coming down by 65%. And the estates department and the client group working on this appreciate there's more capital investment in incorporating these details and the thick walls and amount of insulation you need, but the payback is so quick and long-term and will provide fantastic benefits. And it's really wonderful to be working at this new frontier and sharing. There's a lot of information out there on Passive House at the moment, and the community around Passive House who think this will be the way forward are so open to sharing ideas and implementing them. So the second part of the talk, which is shorter, it's only a few slides here, I really wanted to bring a different viewpoint to the talk today. And this is a piece of internal research we did earlier in lockdown. It came out of asking students within our office, past and present, about their recent experience of university. They're obviously a lot closer to it than I am. And for those who've just returned, what COVID might mean. In the discussion, we all agreed we had a favourite space or building at university, and that quite often conformed to a archetypal space that really gives identity to the learning environment. But we also discussed that period before we went to university. Many people thought of university as something very hard to get into, something impermeable, impregnable, and even difficult to understand when you first got there in terms of the spaces and the interactions and how you get used to it. And we came up with the idea or the analogy of a walled city. And also the walled city helped thinking that once you're at university that you're there to work hard and maybe don't get the opportunity to engage too much because you've got your head down working. However, everyone in the conversation had a ready example of how that perception is being broken down. We could all share really good examples of outreach initiatives that make people feel more welcome and understand what they're coming to, of having more chance at the end of their period at university, initiatives that provide stepping stones to jobs through enterprise and entrepreneurship. And we could think of plenty of buildings that are breaking down that analogy of the walled city. Top right, we show the Bartlett, recently finished, of course, fantastic building with that ethos of being present and open to the street. Really saying to people, you're welcome, you can come and join us in this environment. When we challenged ourselves to draw this, we came up with the idea that sustainability could be a unifying thread for the future of universities and indeed education estate development, that we should really be passionate and committed to greening, to retrofitting buildings, and reimagining how we use spaces. So we left the study hopeful that we might be able to start to break down this analogy of the walled city, and maybe to move towards an analogy of a walled garden, of a campus that is outward looking, that's breathable, and imparts a sense of well-being and of welcome.
Thank you, Stephen. Our panel discussion, chaired by Ruth Slavid, and Q&A follows our third presentation, but for the second presentation we turn to structured and planned upgrades, refurbishment and maintenance with SIG Design Technology's National Specification Manager, Ian Dryden.
Hi there, working with academies on estate management is what we're going to talk about today. So learning aims for today I will talk through multi-academy trusts and the smaller academy status of various schools. We'll talk quickly about the funding options that are available to all those people, and then we'll talk about how to work with academies, and then we're going to work through a project that I worked with on Heathfield Academy Trust. We'll talk through that in detail about how we planned and things like that, and it'll hopefully all come together. So multi-academy trust, it's 5 schools, 3,000 pupils, and that becomes a multi-academy trust. So that becomes available to school condition allocation, which is SCA. Smaller mats under the 5 schools or 3,000 pupils still bid for SIF improvement funding for SIF each year. That normally opens about, now a bit delayed this year because of the current pandemic. What's that money for? It's for maintaining school buildings, it's for IT upgrades, all this sort of thing. But that SCA funding is responsibly managed by the trust, which obviously comes with its own unique challenges. Those mainly are that there's not really that many estates professionals. It's generally the caretaker or a business manager who's looking after that. Things are changing as we get further into multi-academy trusts. You've got to remember they've only been around maybe 6-7 years now, so they're starting to become more professional. But this is how we as professionals, experts all in our fields, of how we can help multi-academy trusts. And I'm hoping this will really explain how to educate yourselves, how you can do it, and then hopefully come back to people like me and other manufacturers to support you. They generally find that they're very reactive to issues. Obviously, they can't afford for a classroom to be closed for a leaking roof, so they'll go to yell.com or the good old Yellow Pages back in the day, find a roofing contractor who will turn up, paint something on there, or torch a bit of felt on, or weld a bit of single ply on there. And that's the problem solved, or it's certainly for the short-term fix. They could end up with SIF funding denied because they've not got a professional involved. So people like our partners and many others along there as surveyors, and also the fact that we all can offer full roof surveys. This really gives us the benefit to the mat. So we get in there, we're the experts, let us control your estate, let me manage your estate. For me, obviously it's roofing, but for most of you here, it'll be about managing the entire school. So you could have 10, 12 different schools with reports, survey reports from myself, from builders, from window fitters. So you can actually start to put a plan of action together for the multi-academy trust. So, as I say, Heathfield Academy Trust is one that I worked with. And I think this gives us a great example about how, if we manage a building or manage a trust estate, you can actually make that money go further, and longer term we will save them money. And this is how we can educate the trusts, sort of let us come in now, and all this what we're going to talk about here, this is a 5-year plan. They can be as long as 10 and 15 years. I've got some that are 15-year plans to manage estates. But when at the end, you'll see the savings that we've achieved in 5 years. You can imagine what the savings like can be over 15 years, where you start managing buildings and start managing within the life expectancy rather than doing it what we're doing at the minute is playing catch up from years of minimal investment by local authorities, in my opinion, and also really bad school stock. We have got that, and now we'll continue, as I did last year when I spoke to everybody. We'll say that we've got very poor school stock in the UK, and we do need to address that. And this is how we as professionals can help them with the funding that's out there. So Heathfield, just this is a bit of an overview. As you see, it's a very sprawling school, single level, couple of multi-storey levels, but very few, very sprawling school, very typical of the north of England. Numerous extensions, bolt-ons here, bolt-ons there, nothing really detailed correctly, just really bad build-up. So what we did is we got myself involved, and I went out there and started doing a survey some 5 years ago, and this is what we came up with. So we identified, for the purposes, because this was SIF funding, so imagine the estate, we're using SIF funding to manage the estate. Now, if you look at the size of the school, it's huge. You very rarely are you going to get money to do this entire estate. So what we did, we identified the areas of work. We had red zone 1, 2, amber zone, green zone. I think we can probably all guess by that colour code, and it's quite straightforward. The red are the worst, the green's the best. But what we had to do is, again, we had massive areas of school roof that were just shot to pieces, to be honest. And we had to take the educated decision from years of experience of saying, how much funding are we likely to get? What is the best chance? Where is that cut-off threshold? How can we work with the trust? So we identified it into 2 areas. We thought, right, the top area, so at the top of the drawing here, you'll see that that was the area that was much worse. We have a big single ply roof that fell completely above an IT suite. So the need there for us was, let's get that done, because if that gets any worse, the impact of the school of losing its entire IT suite for that period of time is a major issue. So we broke it down. We had red area 1, red area 2, and then the amber zones were like, they're getting there, but we know they're going to need doing rather quickly. The green zone, the pressure was off. We knew that, yes, they need doing. Unfortunately, this school was in a position where everything needed doing, but it was like, it doesn't need doing now. It's not leaking, but let's get ahead of the game. And that is the key with estates trust, as you'll understand as professionals, is this is all about educating trusts to, yes, the first few years are going to be really painful. We're going to spend a lot of your budget on roofs or a lot of your budget on getting windows updated. But once you're in front, that's when the savings start coming. And that's what we're trying to educate trusts. This is about us as professional educating trusts that start thinking now long term, and we will save you money. Yes, short term, we're going to have to spend the money. But that's no different. This is the problem that local authorities had by not investing. When now we're in a stage where schools are becoming academies and they're in a very poor structural condition, and now we're trying to catch up. So red area 1, we had, as I say, we had a dining hall, IT block, and classroom. So obviously we don't want to we can't lose a dining hall, otherwise we're not sending our children to school. And obviously an IT block, super important in this day and age. Education revolves around IT all the time. The roof has failed. This was not recoverable. The only saving grace was the single ply area was a timber deck, but it hadn't rotted the timber deck yet. So we were successful with our SIF bid. We broke it down into areas. We explained what we could do. We looked at things that we didn't have to strip. It was about getting things correct. So as you can see, this is the sort of thing we're up against, failed laps. I mean, the bottom right there, that's a roof light. I mean, I haven't seen a roof light in years, and that's glass as well. So, you can see the back there. I don't really quite make it out in the presentation, but that's an actual one that they've actually felted over because it's smashed. I mean, where that glass went, it went into the school. You had outlets that were completely blocked, as you can see in the top right, and at the top left there, you can see the amount of water that's coming in through roof lights, and that's directly above an IT suite. And this is really big issues. So with us involved, we looked at designing entire cut to full schemes to get rid of standing water issues. And again, we looked at it correctly, and we managed it in such a way that we minimized the cost. So as you can see, there's big areas of flatboard in there with minimum cut to fulls, because that's where the standing water issues were. We're not spending money for spending money's sake, and that's what it's about with managing people's money. As you say, we're trying to give them the best value for money, but also not just give them the best value, the best roof for the money they have to spend, they can spend. So as I say, this work continues. So we've now got the surveyor involved. We've got a contractor that did the first phase. So now we're into year 2, and the next bid is starting to look at it. So as you say, here it is. This is the next area. As you can see, it's now we've moved across to the infants classroom block. It's all classrooms going forward for this entire school, really. So whilst that work was going on in zone 1, I've gone over to zone 2 and started my SIF bid. Again, I'm getting ahead of the SIF bid funding dates because I know it's coming. That again gives me time to really concentrate, and I say this all the time to people, is SIF funding may open in September, but I'm quite happy to go route in July, January for that matter, for the following year, because the more time I have to look at a roof, the more time I have to prepare my reports, the more time that gives you to prepare your reports, the stronger our SIF bid will be. But also, if we're looking at estates management, we're on the roof anyway, we've got all the health and safety in place, so that allows me then to roam freely across your entire estate and start getting ahead of the game. Again, just every phase, let me go up there again, or you go up there, or whoever goes up there, or every phase we do one. Let's go back over the next 6 phases, 7 phases of roofs, just to see if we've been caught out. Maybe that lap that we thought, those laps that we thought we were going to break for 4 years, suddenly are 3, and we need to start adjusting things, and the green area becomes amber, and an amber area becomes green. Again, it's an evolving process, but again, we'll go back to the Heathfield Academy year 2. So we're on the red zone again. Year 2, we were successful for a second successive year, because again, we're showing value for money. We're showing that we're in control of the estate. So the deterioration of the exterior cladding, we had complete deck failure in other areas, but again, we're starting to get a little bit in control because we've caught it actually earlier than it being a complete failure. It did give us options in a way to be flexible with our specification, which it sounds a bit strange, but as again, because we hadn't got complete deck failure, we managed to save some existing deck, which meant we kept falls, which then meant that we could reduce the cut to fall scheme. So rather than having 1,500 square meters of cut to falls, we probably only had 500 square meters. So again, we're reducing cost and staying ahead of things. So this is what works commenced on site. As you can see, there's a lot going on there. We've got, everything went to tender, and we were lucky in the fact that it was the same contractor on it. And to be fair, it was the same contractor on all phases on this school, which give continuity, which is brilliant. So the work started on site. And as I say there, because we were starting to get ahead of things, we only had to strip 25% of the roof. The rest of it we were able to overlay. Again, that's through core sampling, through moisture mapping, through doing various things to stay ahead of the game. But obviously that gave the school a savings rate, because if that had just waited and waited and waited, then we'd have had timber deck fail across the entire roof, which increased costs. Again, so you can see what we did. It was very much the same to all the other phases. It was a self-adhesive VCL, because obviously we're talking with timber. We don't put a torch anywhere near timber. It's in all British standards. We've got safety torch to consider in an FRC guidelines and things like that. And as I say, PIR cut to falls or enhanced falls, because we were just addressing small areas of ponding water, historic ponding water. So we're just getting rid of them whilst we've got the opportunity. As I say, it's getting the best value for money, given a complete system. So rolling on a little bit further, third year, yes, we were successful for the third year running for SIF bidding on one academy trust. This was last year. This has just been completed, what would it be, 4 weeks ago, despite the late finish, again, because we were ahead of the game, because SIF funding, as we all know, this year was delayed until it was announced in July, because we were so far in advance of everything, we were still able to start the second week of the school holidays because we were organised. Now, I know schools that are just starting now that were given SIF funding because they weren't organised, or they didn't have a partner who was organised. And this is where us as professionals, again, speaking with the business manager, speaking with caretakers, allow us to be ahead of the curve. Now, everything we've worked on has always been a 10, 12-week programme, so we're always running out into live school terms, but we are doing big areas. But if you can imagine starting this on the 1st of September because we weren't organised, we would have been running that into Christmas, into the current stream of bad weather. We've managed to take advantage of all this good weather, minimising the risk to the school when we've had to strip areas and things like that. So this again, it's about staying ahead of the curve trying to manage the building. But again, because now we're into the amber area, we've managed, again, we're now into overlay only. We don't have to strip much. There was a little bit of stripping, which you'll see, and you'll see why, very apparent from the core sample. But again, we're now ahead of the game. We're now saving big money for this school, because if we had to strip all this area, we're looking at doubling the funding cost. We're reducing the chances of them getting funding because they're asking for more money upon more money. And also, we're spending the school or the trust money. So if we treated this as a trust, so if we take SIF out of this for a second and pretend this is now a multi-academy trust, we've gone through the pain, we've addressed all the red areas that all like the trust owns, and year 3, 4, 5, we're now into amber areas. We're now starting to minimise or practically wipe out any disruption to the school on a daily process. We're now managing their estate so that we're saving them money. So like I say, this is all about, and I'm going to keep saying it, it's about developing a relationship with a trust where we become their building professional, rather than relying on the yellow pages or the yell.com or Trust to Trade, all these wonderful places. And I understand roofing contractors, some of them, a lot of the bigger contractors understand roofing. But unfortunately, a lot of the large contractors aren't going to turn out to do a little repair on a school. It's going to be a littler contractor who might not always know what they're doing. They're great tradesmen, and we will give them that. They're absolutely superb tradesmen. But, you know, give me a torch, and I'm not a great tradesman. What I am very good at is finding solutions and designing roofs. That's my speciality. As you are specialists in your individual areas, we've all got that. So it's about, again, getting these people to trust us, getting them to understand what we're about. So this is the area that we stripped, obviously, as you can see. I'll just take that back a bit because it moved a bit quickly. You can see it was pretty good. So that was the only area now that we had left that was major issues. Yes, we had some leaks, but this is all really under that area that we talked about. All the rest of the school could be overlaid. This gives us massive benefits. You know, the work site, as I say, just recently, the majority of the roof was overlaid. We had very minimal insulation requirements because we only had that really thin area where we had to get cut to fold for. All the rest of it had decent folds. So we managed to use a flat board. We upgraded it to achieve 0.18, achieve new and current regulations. So it really worked really well. Like I say, we're ahead. And, you know, and we've gone up there. This just literally 2 weeks ago, I was up there again in the sun, much better for me. And we've started to look at the green area. As you say, we're now trusted by this academy. We're now trusted by the estates managers as a roofing consultant. The surveyor D3 are very much trusted as their surveyor and partner for the entire trust, for Lingfield Trust. This is now very much, we all trust each other. We all get the results. You know, we'll find out next year if we get this green area, it's going to be a lot tougher to get money because we are now ahead of the curve. But it's a great place to be, that this school now doesn't have the leaks that it had before. So I'm just going to show you some figures. These are caveated by they are budgets for what if we didn't do it. So this is reactive. If on the phase 1 we hadn't have done it, then we would have ended up having to strip even more deck. So you see that. So that's the next slide there. That's what it costs to do. The first, it's the amount it could have cost if we start adding on stripping deck. I mean, that's a big problem. And not to mention the disruption to the school of stripping entire roof decks off. You need fall arrest, crash mats. The whole IT suite needs emptying out, which obviously the IT suite has the central servers for the school. There's a lot. It starts becoming really costly in a very short space of time. You see the savings there. Year 1 alone were £100,000. Now we'll go on to phase 2. Year 2, again, we're staying ahead of things. Again, this additional cost is literally down to not having to renew as much deck. Obviously, the saving isn't quite as much because we've got a lot of the health and safety already in because we have to strip 25% of the deck. So this is purely now just the deck, but we've saved money again. You know, £78,000. And this goes on year in, year out. You know, if in 5 years' time, if this roof had gone on for another 2 years, it would have been a full strip. By overlaying the roof, again, a big saving. When we say a full strip, we mean down to the concrete slab. In this case, it was concrete slab, so there's a bit less of a of a jump in cost. We're just talking about stripping off and removing insulation and a little bit of extra time on site. And obviously, looking at this year, if we allowed that to run for another, it says 10 years, maybe 6 to 10 years time, and that roof failed, it's a massive cost. We are now in the situation where we're going to be able to overlay that entire area. So, like I say, this is a 5-year plan, and we've saved the trust £348,000. Now, if we go into a bigger trust, so a multi-academy trust that's SCA funding, we can multiply that. I dread to think to what, because we could be talking at 15 academies rather than just one academy. This is one academy in this smaller trust. If we start going to bigger trusts, or you go back to bigger trusts and say, let us manage your estate, and these are the sorts of figures, by letting us grade your roofs, by being ahead of the curve. And we're working with trusts all the time to build this relationship. But obviously relationships, this are built on trust. And I believe that we've managed to achieve that. I really do. And this is a quick quote from the business schools manager at Lingfield Trust at Heathfield Academy. You know, they are really happy with us, and they're really happy with the surveyors D3. We've managed their estate for them for this one school. We're looking at the rest, the other few schools within their smaller trust. And obviously they're eventually going to grow to be SCA funding, and then, you know, we'll be managing that money for them. For you, obviously, this is just concentrating on roofing. For you, it's to see the bigger picture, that you could manage a bigger estate. So you'll be managing windows, you could be managing, like say, server rooms, classroom extensions. So there's all these things that you can add on by gaining their trust. But the first step is to obviously find a way of building this trust. And for me, this is the way of doing it, by showing that we've got the best interests at heart, by saying that we understand your school. If you go into more schools and say, where does it leak? They generally say everywhere, in my opinion. I might be wrong. There's very rarely that I don't get that opinion, or they'll show me just a few key areas. So we get those key areas addressed, we look at the rest, and then it's about maintaining things. And maintaining is the key thing here. So what to consider when we're designing? There's all sorts of considerations. You can see there, these are just a few of the projects we've been involved in, and there's all sorts of things to do. I'd like to finish by saying we don't just look at flat roofs. This has all been about flat roofs today. We do slating, we do look at pitch roofs, we do green roofs, we do hard metals. All these things, you'll be quite surprised, are found on schools, depending on whereabouts you are in the country. The great thing about today is normally this is held in London. I'm hoping that this might go out across the country now. And I know up near me in the northeast, we have a lot of schools with slates on them. And then also I know in other areas we've got, you know, metal sheeted holes and all these other things. We can help with all that. I think everyone can, but it's about, we're quite unique in the way that we can help with everything. And how do we do that? We have a very structured approach. As I say, we'll come out, we'll do surveys, we'll manage our product selection, so we'll make sure you get the right product. Then we manage the site process, and then we finish that up with great guarantees. And that's always the best thing, is reliable, robust guarantees. So hopefully, after this, you might have some questions. If anyone would like to book any one of our CPDs, you can see there, please contact me or the number on the screen. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Ian. Just to remind you, Ruth Slavid will be chairing the panel discussion immediately after our opening presentations. And if you'd like to ask a question, please click Q&A now. For our final presentation, we'll take a guided tour of the redesigning, rebuilding and refurbishment work at St Paul's School with Michelle Cohen, Director, Walters & Cohen Architects.
Thank you very much for inviting me to present today. It's wonderful to be part of this conversation. And what I've been asked to do is to speak about particularly the design of St Paul's General Teaching Building, which Walters & Cohen completed earlier this year, just before the first lockdown, in terms of supporting long-term estate strategies. So in order to understand why we built the new General Teaching Building, I'm going to take you back a little bit and just tell you what the estate was like and how we got to where we are. So the St Paul's Boys' School is just south of the Thames, and you can see in the beautiful 3-axo that Paul and Moya did, that's the Thames over there. there you can see Hammersmith Bridge in the background, which is absolutely beautiful. And it was built towards the end of the 60s. It was a prep school as well as a senior school, and had quite a few boarding houses you can see along the river, which was lovely. And this is the main sports complex. And this building over here was general teaching with the chapel and a science building. These buildings had stood really very well. It was a very clever design. It was a deep plan. And the problems with the building was that it was a clasp building. So it was a framed steel structure. It had really come to the end of its life. Every time the pupils moved around, every 40 minutes, the whole building shook. The sustainability, there was really no sustainability. It was very lightweight. Unfortunately, although it was safe to use, it was really not safe to do any remedial work because the building was full of asbestos. And in fact, it took us probably in total almost the best part of a year over the build program to very carefully remove the asbestos before the building was pulled down. But this image over here is of Founders Court, and what you can see is the 3-story class building and a single story in this area dining room building. With the Thames, you can just see the trees along the Thames towards the rear. And Founders Court became part of the design for the new general teaching building. Behind the general teaching building, which you can see popping up over here, there's an area which was known as the North Access Road. It was very back of house. I'm actually showing you the good bits here, because there was an energy center, so you can see the chimney. There was a link over to the music building. It was primarily a service route because this is where the energy center and the bins and the kitchen were served from. And it was quite a hazardous place for the students to cross over on a daily basis. So the school decided in the mid-2000s to undertake a master plan. That master plan was done by Patel Taylor, and the school received a hybrid master plan for redevelopment towards the end of 2008. And what you see here is a model that was made by Nicholas Hare, Nicholas Hare Architects, who then they won the competition to do the first phase. And what you're seeing here is that was Founders Court over there. I just want to orientate you. The Thames is over here. And the general teaching building is this kind of back to front F building, which was very much part of the Patel Taylor scheme. And Nicholas Hare designed and built the science building, which is this building over here, which filled in the sides of the Founders Court. And there was a large building in this area, which was for an enormous hall and dining room. So 2008 happened. They built the science building, and 2011, St. Paul's got a new High Master, Professor Mark Bailey, and they also at the same time decided that they needed to reconsider their priorities in the delivery of the master plan. And they went to competition not to do the next phase of the Nick Hare scheme, which was actually the Grand Hall and the library, which sat in the middle of Founders Court over there. But what they said was they really needed to prioritize the teaching buildings. You know, the kind of market had changed somewhat from 2008 in the crash. And that's when Walters & Cohen got involved. So we undertook 6 months of intensive consultation with the school, observing, watching, seeing how the existing campus worked, where the students came from, how the servicing worked. And we developed a very thorough brief and feasibility study for the school. And at that time, we said to them that they needed to produce an L-shaped building like this that tied into the Nick Hare building, the science building there, that also tied into the Milton building, which is their art and their English building. Because what we found was that pupils were having to go down to go up, to go down to go up. And that 40 minutes, every lesson change was becoming quite frenetic because students were having to move across campus, and both horizontally and vertically. So the aim was to ease the movement around the school buildings, and at the same time to maximize the building in the areas we could build in, because unfortunately on the Thames, it's also part of metropolitan open land. So we couldn't just build anywhere. We had to build, unfortunately, on the footprint of the existing general teaching building and within the reserved matters parameters, or the parameters of the reserved matters application. So what the school said was, that's absolutely fine, but what the priority was, that we didn't impact the education of the pupils. So we had to start thinking about where we could build the most in the shortest time to then minimize the disruption to the pupils. And I will show you what we then did. So this was actually the 6 months of the feasibility study was incredible, because the school, I must say, was one of the best we've ever worked with in terms of engagement, with allowing us to engage across the school community. And we really did get to understand the school, their vision, their ethos, where they wanted to be, that they didn't want to build a building that they were going to have to knock down in 30 or 40 years, as they had done with the existing buildings. They wanted the building to last. They wanted it to be a building that was, I remember that was, they didn't want it to be pompous. They wanted it to be very much reflect the ethos of St. Paul's. And they often said they wanted it great, but not grand. And so this was all part of us trying to understand the final building. We did a lot of sketches like this, where we looked at how learning spaces would be clustered around breakout spaces. Interestingly enough, breakout spaces were never in the original brief. How we would get light down deep into the plan. Because what we knew was that if we had to build on the footprint of the existing buildings and within the parameters of the master plan, that was going to have to be a deep plan. So we then started working on the atriums, which you can begin to see over here, coming through the section of the building, about how we would naturally light and ventilate this building. Now, these were sketches we did actually in the feasibility study. And what we realized from a very early stage was that St. Paul's wanted to do what they did currently, but better in the buildings. So it was all about debate and dialogue, and where that happened within the new design. So I told you that we had to minimize disruption to the pupils. We started, so the L shape, which I've already described. There's the Thames up there, linking into science over here, linking into the Milton building, and linking into science in this area over here. And what we said was, okay, the dining room sat in this area here. It was single story. And we identified that whole strip along what was known as the North Access Road, you know, the horrible road I showed you, that could be developed as, instead of a single-story building, a 3-story building. That would then mean that the amount of decant that we needed when we pulled down the main building was substantially reduced. So we divided the school into the building into 2 phases, and this is phase 1, which sat along the North Access Road, and phase 2, which was the bit that was completed in February of this year. And we were, this move in being able to divide the whole build, which was about 9,500 square meters, into two, meant that we only needed to provide 6 general teaching spaces in temporary accommodation during the whole build. We did provide a temporary dining room and temporary kitchen, but we really didn't want to do it for the academic spaces. And bear in mind that what this building was really about was primarily the academic. I think there would land up being 48 new general teaching classes, but also what we call the dual spaces, the library, the atrium, the Monty room, which is a conference facility, the dining space, and secular hall and chapel. So how did this pan out? And what I've got here is actually the landscape plan, which I think was really important, because I said to you the breakout spaces were not part of the brief. Actually, neither was the landscape as a learning space, or a space that was fundamental to the design. And we worked very closely with BHSLA on 2 prime areas. One was that North Access Road, and the other one was Founders Court. And actually, the unfortunate thing is that the meadow, which is due to come in here, will happen when the current building that is on there is demolished. And that will open this corner up completely onto Big Side, which is their main playing field for rugby. So we got rid of the bins. They went into part of the enabling work and far away. We got rid of the energy centre in the location that it was, which was about over here, and put it on the roof of phase 1. And the reason we did that was that the energy centre actually feeds the whole of the school. And this was work that we did with Max Fordham to make sure that the centralised energy centre was also served by a district heating main, which we started putting in all the way down the access road, down the east road, and it does wrap around down the south as well. So just trying to think, because at some stage the school will be replacing the remaining class buildings, and making sure that the infrastructure is there to actually do that really well. We then made the North Access Road into a priority pedestrian area, so that there was easy routes across to the existing buildings on the other side, which are music and drama. And we developed Founders Court into a space which, instead of just being very flat with a bit of grass, created a series of outdoor rooms which could be used for social events, or for bigger gatherings, or just for the students to actually be outside and hang out together. So this is the layout of the ground floor, and I don't want to speak too much about it, other than to say we identified lockers needed to go in this area, because we realized that 70% of the students come from that side of the school. The atrium, which is the social heart of the space, links Founders Court and Big Side. And we did keep the dining room where it was, because it had this wonderful link between Founders Court and the river. And actually what we did was that the whole of the south elevation of the dining room slides away, so that that space can become one with inside and outside. And these were things that the school had never experienced before. And I don't think they realized when the benefits of these spaces that can change. And it was just wonderful to see them use it the way it was intended from spring onwards, really. The first floor, I think the only things to really point out is that we have the library very deliberately located in this area here, with views over the Thames. And then we've got the chapel and the secular hall. In fact, this is the second floor, sorry, in this area over here, where we felt that they needed to be up in the air, get beautiful views, and actually, so you had a large gathering space, which was not always on the ground floor. So we weren't always taking people down to the ground to gather. So because we had this really deep plan, we needed to get light in. And we did this by introducing atriums in very regular intervals through the plan. And those atriums we worked with Max Fordham very carefully on the sustainability, because it was completely, we wanted a naturally ventilated building and excited. It's a lovely, lovely building to be in. It feels good. So for instance, this is a section through the atrium, which is probably the main space which has one of the light wells. I'll show you images of this in a little bit further on. Opening sections through the external wall, getting natural ventilation at high level, and then it pops up with opening sections at the top, and it draws the air through like a chimney. And of course, because you've got exposed concrete and thermal mass, in summer, it all kind of ventilates nicely, and the thermal mass helps maintain the constant temperature. And everything closes down in winter, and we have just high-level vents for CO2 purging. The whole of the roof was a biodiverse roof, and then we lifted PVs above that, and you can see that in this section. So here's the classroom. Now this is a classroom in phase 1, so founders called the landscape hadn't happened, and actually you can just see the hoarding for phase 2 popping out there. But what you can see is the ventilation strategy, the concrete, which is a beautiful, this is in situ concrete, beautiful in situ concrete done by Tureens, so the thermal mass. And what happens is at the top, those are the ventilators for winter and for CO2. And then in summer, you open up the ventilator, which comes down to the ground. And it was really important for us that the windows come down to the ground and you see out, and these spaces feel more generous than they probably are because of the window ventilation solution. I spoke about the deep plan. So this is a smaller atrium, and these pop along. So as you go on your journey around the school, it's broken up by these breakout spaces, timber clad elements, and then we've introduced and brought in some of the beautiful artwork that the school has, a beautiful artwork and artifacts. But then these atriums provide light and ventilation right to the deepest part of the plan. So this is a 3-story atrium in phase 2. And here what you see is that the breakout space here was different. So the breakout space in phase 1 is for groups of 8 to 10. The breakout space in phase 2 are for 2 people to sit in a little area and have a chat. And that was quite deliberate around the departments that we started to play around with. But once again, in order to make sure that departments could move around, we didn't do the kind of traditional finger department thing where they were very separate. You could actually get a department which contracted and grew, depending on the choices that the students made. This is the atrium, which I showed you a section through, and it does have the most beautiful terrace out towards the east and this side over here, but very generous. It's the social heart of the school, and unfortunately, they occupied this literally 2 to 3 weeks before lockdown, and we got some of our own photographs with it full of students, but they're really not good enough for to show you. And the library has got exposed concrete soffits. It's got a big light area in the deepest part of the library so that you can use the library without the lights on during the day if that's what you want. And then these enormous windows, the library sits on the first floor, actually get the view of the Thames, and you're reminded where you are. So this is the view of the library looking in from, you can see it from across the Thames. And so it's a lovely way of showcasing the school. And this is an image of the North Access Road. So it was quite important that we had, it was a precast concrete solution here. And the chimneys are where we've got the natural ventilation around the concrete elements of the school. So we've got precast concrete around the outside, And on the inside, we used a similar idea with rhythm or no rhythm, but we used a powder-coated aluminium. So it is different, but it feels, there is a synergy because of the rhythm. And this is the image of Founders Court as a usable space now, the beginning of the outdoor cluster areas with seats and tables. And you can just see there what I was telling you about the opening up of the dining room that then links through to the Thames. So in terms of sustainability and renewables, this was all based on the master plan, which was achieved in 2008. We worked to those regulations or requirements. I spoke to you about the energy centre, which you actually saw in the previous scheme at the top. And we made sure that we could always access that really easily and get new plant in from the North Access Road. The PVs were calculated at just under 13 kilowatts per hour per year. And we were trying to make up some of the shortfall of PV because in the master plan, unfortunately, it was going to be a biomass solution. And of course, when we came, 5 or 6 years later, it was no way, we can't use biomass, we've got to change. So Max Fordham suggested PV, which was good. The CO2 reduction, bear in mind that we're working on 2008 requirements. There was a reduction of 17%, and I've spoken about the biodiverse and natural ventilation. So, I suppose the most important thing is it's a really lovely building to be in. The students really, really love it. And actually, so do the staff. Each time we go around, they are telling us new things that they are doing and they're finding, and it's incredibly rewarding.
Thank you, Michelle, and indeed all of our panellists, who now join for the panel discussion chaired by Ruth Slavid.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. I'm sure everybody else did as well. I expected, of course, to see some beautiful and fascinating projects. Sorry, I'm waving around here. I expected to see beautiful and fascinating projects, and I did. But I thought the real insight came from also just seeing how much thought went into them and the discussion and the almost forensic analysis that allowed both the architects to get to their solutions and also for SIG to actually offer the very best of solutions to its client. So that was fabulous. There's a couple of things that occurred to me that I'd like to ask. So I'm going to ask them, and then I will also ask you some questions which have been sent in by the audience. One of them is we've really seen the advantage of thinking ahead, planning, and in a lot of these projects, the amount of time that went into the planning. What happens though when someone comes to you and says, for whatever reason, we need it and we need it now, we need it quickly? I think, Ian, that might be a question for you, first of all.
Yeah, we've dealt with SIF bids on a very short notice before. It can be done. We'll no doubt get them again this year, especially with the COVID crisis at the moment. We've got everything's been delayed, especially the SIF announcements this year. They were announced who got funding in July to be started the middle of July. So we are flexible enough to be able to do that. We've already started that this year. We were literally on site in 2 weeks. In terms of the SIF applications, obviously the more time we have, the better. But what we generally find is if we have to work quickly this year and we fail, then what we do is then we've got insight for the following year already, and then we plan to then be much stronger in our bid or in planning for the year after.
That's brilliant. And you did mention the COVID word. I know Michelle talked about her project and, her lovely setup that she had. And then, of course, everybody disappeared almost immediately. And Stephen had that really nice insight of saying we've made 6 years progress in 6 months in terms of mixed learning. So I guess the question, and I know this is coming from one of our questioners as well, is how different is design going to be in a pandemic or post-pandemic world. Michelle, I don't know if you'd like to say something about that.
I mean, we were really lucky on St Paul's because phase one opened 3 years ago. So we had the benefits of that actually being open. And it was right at the end where we just opened the building before COVID. But in terms of change, I think we are already speaking a lot about this. We're definitely speaking about ventilation systems and what the best thing is. And actually, everyone is saying, as far as humanly possible, natural ventilation, which is brilliant because we know that actually that's what schools and learning environments really like if they don't have issues around noise and air quality and things like that. And also long term, the cost is obviously needs to be considered. And, you know, when you've got fewer bits of equipment to fix on a regular basis, it's always better. We are speaking and have been speaking for so long about the fact that you need a variety of spaces within a school. And the variety of spaces allows you to teach in different size groups or allows, you know, that independence of learning. And I think more and more we're going to obviously want those kinds of spaces. And I do know that universities are going to be probably very different. The thing about schools is we've been starting to say, really, what is the school there for? Well, it's definitely for academic, growing the academic knowledge of the child. It's definitely there for growing the kind of active, the physical bit of your children as well. And it's absolutely there to grow a social conscience and how you grow a young child into being a very valuable, active member of our society. Those things, some of them can be done online and away from school, but actually, in order to know how to respond, how to deal with people, deal with conflict, deal with all of these things, you need to come together. So we don't think that this kind of drive towards everything online is necessarily the right thing for schools.
That's really thorough, thank you. You mentioned acoustics there, and we had a question come in from the audience, and I think this is one for Ian, which says, how do you achieve BB 93 compliance when using a PIR insulation scheme? Now, I'm guessing this is to do with rain noise, isn't it?
Yeah, I would have to come back to them because it's every refurbishment is completely unique. So we would have individual calculations done. We would have to come back to that person. If they want to make contact with me directly through the links, I'll find out and get them a thorough answer back. I can't really answer it on the spot like that, but I can come back to them. In-depth answer direct.
Now, somebody asked a question about passive house, and I know that, Stephen, you've used that on St John's College, and the question really was responding to the zero carbon challenge. Is passive house the answer?
Yes, in certain scenarios. We didn't use passive house actually on St John's. We had target zero carbon. I showed an image of another project we're working on with passive house.
I'm sorry.
But that's okay, because some of the principles are very similar. It's about getting a really, really good seal on the buildings. And with that, it's picking up on Michelle's point, really. We shouldn't be putting energy into buildings unnecessarily. So you almost take that fabric first approach into making the skin of the building work as hard as possible initially. And it does cost more to get to that level of design quality. But the thing I find amazing in passive house is it really ups the standard of buildability, because it means the checking on site, and if you embed it fully in the construction process, we will raise the level of construction to meet those standards. So it's a really, really wonderful model. It doesn't work particularly well yet in certain building types, but it is quite good in a lot of spaces you need in education facilities in particular.
Thank you very much. just a quick one, and I think this will go to Michelle. I think I know the answer, but somebody was asking, why is biomass not more widely specified for education buildings? Surely it would help with sustainability. I'm guessing it's all those trucks bringing all those pellets in from dubious sources, isn't it?
It's absolutely that. And it's actually now you can't use biomass in many areas because of air quality. So it just became a no-no quite quickly. Certainly in inner city areas, you're not going to be able to use biomass. There may be certain rural areas where it's still acceptable, but we're using a lot of things like air source heat pumps, and which don't require the trucks and have a much cleaner, I suppose, end product because you don't have the smoke and things like that.
Okay, you talked about natural ventilation, and one of the audience has said, what feedback have you had from those who end up sitting close to open windows and the natural draft that those people sitting closest experience? Do they end up closing the windows? I'll give you that. I'd go to Stephen first, I think, and then I'll come back to Michelle.
Well, yeah, that is an issue, but say you take a model like the library, people do love to work in different scenarios, so it's nice to give them a really broad range of spaces. And the thing is, I think it came out of Building Schools for the Future, and other research was done at the time. The benefit to concentration and alertness and your general well-being of having natural air moving through a space is so beneficial that, yeah, that slight downside to the person who maybe gets the breeze, then yeah, close the window when you're a bit uncomfortable, but try and get the natural air in when you can. And Michelle's points are fully endorsed. If we can make our buildings breathe more, we'll all be a lot more healthy.
That's great. Now, you mentioned Building Schools for the Future, and somebody's asked, what lessons have we learnt from Building Schools for the Future and the Academies programme? I don't know, Ian, you're going into a lot of schools. I don't know whether you're feeling that there are lessons that you've learnt.
I think that we never stop learning, or across any of the decisions we've made on investments and things. I mean, I think I said in my presentation that we look at schools now that were built in the 60s and 70s by local authorities that have nothing to do with building schools for the future, but because they aren't maintained, they've got issues. And I think even with Building Schools for the Future, yes, there's been issues there, and they've been very well highlighted in the press and things. But if we don't maintain things are going to fail, and I think that's the problem. I don't think we always plan for maintenance. So I think it's something we can all learn is planning for maintenance when we're designing buildings and things like that. If we plan to maintain the building, they will last longer. There's plenty of things I've been on academies that have been built in the very recent past with no safe access, no safe access points, no man-safe systems. So, we should be planning for that as professionals, really. And even myself, when I'm going in and looking at refurbished projects, we do advise man-safe systems so we can actually get up there and maintain our systems to enable us to maintain our guarantees.
Well, that's brilliant. And I suppose I have to go back to our architects now and go, how much are you planning for maintenance? Michelle?
Oh, we start off planning for maintenance. I mean, the kind of conversations we had on St. Paul's around, I spoke about the energy centre and making sure that it was easily accessible, that you could, so from the biggest bits of kit to the smaller access within the building is, every single kind of requirement in terms of we need to get to that bit of kit. Okay, well, let's make sure you can get to it. But also then things like maintenance, general maintenance, like how do you clean the windows safely? How do you do those things? So actually that's one of the really good things about having, principal designers as part of the team up front. We are talking about safety, maintenance, access all the time.
Stephen? You're working for Oxford colleges who are thinking about the next 100 years. So you're probably in rather a privileged position, aren't you?
Well, probably to come from the other angle, potentially not the new build, but I showed a lot of projects, new build, extension, or
Yeah.
whole refurbishment on existing buildings. And quite often we'll come into a situation, whether it's an education project or not, where one of the catalysts is maintenance hasn't been taken and they've got a problem. And sometimes that problem can start to unlock some urgent fixes that need to be done, but it can help to focus the team on thinking, well, let's not leave ourselves in that position again. It was like the St. Paul's School thing. We don't want to knock this one down and only have a 30-year lifespan. And I think what's interesting on that St. John's project, I showed that the first stage was a really small project, but it helped unlock. And sometimes you do need to break projects down and not have this one big idea and a phase development. I know obviously St. Paul's is a good client as well in that way, that they are managing their estate. And having those discussions within the design meetings is obviously a very fruitful way of embedding it in the way that we design and then build it on site.
And I think I've seen with both of you where you obviously have maintained as much building fabric as you possibly could. I mean, Michelle was talking about, well, you were talking about the class building, which you had to get rid of. But one of the questions that's come in says, with many school buildings decaying, how do you strike the balance between refurbishment and demolition rebuild and the associated environmental impact? Now, you were shaking your head at me, Michelle. I don't think I was asking you a daft question, but tell me why you're shaking your head.
I mean, it is a very important thing. The first thing you try and do is, in today's climate, is see if there's any way, whatever you can save, you save it. We don't want to pull things down unnecessarily. Unfortunately, with St. Paul's, once you removed the asbestos, there was only the frame left, and it was a lightweight frame. And given that it was a lightweight building that it had been supporting, it really wasn't used. We couldn't keep it for anything. So in that case, honestly, it was okay. It's better to start again. But for instance, Regent's High School, which is just down the road here, which actually was a BSF, one of the last BSF projects we did, we made a very deliberate decision right at the beginning that we needed to keep the London board school element of the school because it's got so many benefits. It's got these beautiful floor to ceilings. It's got wonderful quality of light. It's got all kinds of things which we just thought that can be the catalyst for what we attach onto this building, which improves the whole of the school environment. So the last thing we wanted to do was pull that down. We took it on board, improved it, and used it as the driver for the new design.
Brilliant. And I think, Ian, you were very much talking about the fact that if you actually get in there and do your planned maintenance, the amount of fabric you have to get rid of is rather reduced, isn't it, if you haven't actually sort of rotted right down to the deck of your roof?
Yeah, it's I keep going back to this, and I will keep pressing it, and I've said it in my thing many times, is we are dealing with legacy of issues by underfunding in the education system and building a long time. So we are sort of trying to play catch up with a lot of the estates management we're doing. But once we get ahead, yeah, you can save a lot of the building. There's still things you need to change, window heights and all these things. But yeah, the sooner we act and the more we can engage with trusts and with education authorities, we can sort of start maintaining things rather than, as you say, getting to the point where walls are coming down, you've got plaster hanging off. So then, yeah, you end up with bigger repair works, or if you can't repair them, they've got to be demolished and started again.
That's brilliant. I'd love to think that there wasn't going to be any underfunding in the future, but I don't think there will. And it hasn't entirely escaped my attention that Michelle's absolutely brilliant project was for a private school, and that quite a bit of the work that we saw from Right and Right was for Oxford colleges who are maybe struggling in some ways, but do have some quite good funding. I mean, there's a whole big issue around funding of projects, and people have sent in questions about it, but I think it's almost too much to discuss now. It's probably a discussion to have for another time. So I think we are getting to the end of our time, and therefore I think I'm just going to thank you all very much indeed. I've had a fascinating time, and I'm sure that means that our audience have as well. So I would like to thank Stephen and Ian and Michelle very much on behalf of Architecture Today. Obviously, great thanks to SIG Design Technology, who are supporting this seminar. I will be writing it up, so if you've missed anything, you have a chance to read it. And mostly, I think the big thank as well has to go to the audience, both, I'm sure, for watching and listening attentively, and for the quality of the questions you sent in. We weren't able to answer all the questions, but that's just the sign of a really great and engaged audience. So there will be more of these events in the future. Look out for them. And I'd just like to thank everybody very much indeed. Thank you. Goodbye.